We have bipartisan support for language access in the Congress for education, for healthcare, and for other things. Bipartisan support, right?
Hey, welcome back to BoostCast. I'm your host, Dieter Runge. My guest today, Dr. Bill Rivers. Bill is a former Russian English translator and interpreter, Russian teacher, academic researcher, administrator, and for-profit and nonprofit organizations with more than 30 years of experience in language advocacy and capacity at the national level, with significant experience in culture and language for economic development and national security, in the intelligence community, private and academic sectors. Lots of publications under his belt in second and third language acquisition, research, proficiency assessment, program evaluation, and language policy development and advocacy. His company, WP Rivers and Associates, is contracted by the ALC for advocacy support. And most recently, Bill has taken an additional role as the chair for the Safe AI Task Force, something we're going to talk about a little bit later today. But I like to refer to Bill just as our man on the Hill. And Bill, Happy New Year and welcome to BoostCast.
Well, Happy New Year to you, Dieter, and thanks for having me on. It's a very long biography, and it tells you two things about me. One, I'm old, and two, I've got like the CEO ADHD, where something holds my interest for a couple of years, and then I move on to something else. Somehow I've made it work. Don't recommend it for everybody, but and yeah, so I do a lot of work with the ALC, consulting on advocacy and supporting the language industry, lobbying on behalf of the language industry. But as Dieter said, I've also spent the last 2 years as the chair of the Safe AI Task Force. I know we're going to talk about that later.
Well, listen, I got to say, I am eternally grateful to you for coordinating those advocacy days through ALC. I had no idea about what DC energy really meant until we did that day of advocacy. I think it was 2017 or 2018. I can't remember now, but I didn't quite get it until I was underneath, in the cafeteria there, and just and then sitting in the offices of Kamala Harris and who else are we trying to think of?
Dianne
Oh
Feinstein.
yeah, Dianne, that's right, Dianne Feinstein, and also Nancy Pelosi's office. How can I forget that? I was half attempted to. I was sitting there waiting, and I was half attempted to take a selfie of myself sitting in her chair, but I thought, nah, I don't want to get tackled by the security guards and things like that. So I opted not to do that. But yeah, you can't describe it until you're there. You're like, oh yeah, I get it. I get it. This is DC. So thank you so much for coordinating those events.
It's my pleasure, and it's so important that people in the industry make their voices heard. We have, as Americans, an inalienable First Amendment right to petition the government for a redress of grievances, to ask our elected officials to act in our interests, to do their jobs, our elected officials and their employees, their appointed employees. And ALC will be doing it again, March 20th, a one-day virtual event, alcus.org, and it's open to anybody. You don't have to be an ALC member to sign up. And come one, come all, because we're going to make our voices heard in DC, making sure the Congress knows what matters for the language industry.
Fantastic. Well, we'll make sure that we properly broadcast and let folks know about that, and we'll include the links to that in the BoostCast as well. So I need to use a word that I've recently inducted into my vocab, Bill, and that is recrudescence. As we prepare for the incoming
Very fraudulent word.
Yeah, well, so it was the word of the day on one of my like feeds, and I'm like, oh my gosh, it's the return of something terrible after a time of reprieve. So
yeah, it has the root of crud in it.
Well, so this is the first question I want to pose to you, just out of the gate here is, what can we anticipate You have you're very close to the ground in DC, and always our first line of defense and feedback. Um, new administration, new policies, possible demand shifts. What, you know, how might this incoming Trump admin impact the demand for our language services in the short and long term? What, you know, what are you, what are you feeling right now? What are you hearing? Where are we at this moment?
So
Like,
Magic 8 Ball says unclear, right? Um, and I don't have a
yeah,
Palantir. I don't have a, I used to have Magic 8 Ball because, God, I am so dating
yeah,
myself when I say that. Um, the incoming administration has, elections have consequences. And so the incoming administration has made clear that there's going to be some fairly significant um, enforcement of immigration, to put it mild.
yeah,
What exact form that takes is not immediately clear. So that has some specific potential consequences that we saw the last
yeah,
time around. The first is there may be a chilling effect where undocumented immigrants, or immigrants who might be somehow concerned about their status, they're on some kind of protected status, like the immigrants from certain Central American countries that are war torn, or
yeah,
Haitian immigrants, or asylees, might be less willing to go and seek medical care, or less willing to enroll their kids in school. And the knock-on consequence of that would be that there might be a reduction in demand for language access in some specific areas. Now, having said that, you can look at the industry trends, from NIMSY or CSA or Slater. During the previous Trump administration, we
yeah,
kept growing. We kept growing. And Donald Trump can take his chair down to the edge of the sea and say, ask the tide not to turn. But America will still be a destination for people seeking a better life, fleeing
yeah,
repression. It might be harder to get into, it might be harder to stay, but we and we've seen a slowdown in immigration and migration, legal immigration, and migrate other migration patterns. We've seen a slowdown during the
yeah,
Biden administration, which is actually, we've had the Obama, Trump, and Biden administrations have all been pretty tough on immigration. We've seen a slowdown in the overall numbers and rates. I mean, it's gone up and down at times, but the overall language access issues have been pretty steady. Um, with respect to language access itself, the which is an enormous driver, the legal basis for those who are not in the states. We have Title VI of the Civil
yeah,
Rights Act, Lau v. Nichols, which interprets the national origin discrimination in Title VI as extending to language status. We have the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act. We have the PPACA, the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act, also known as
yeah,
Obamacare. Um, None of those bills are going away. The recent regulations, they might change, but they were crafted in a way, at least in my opinion. I'm not a lawyer. I'm a linguist, and a lobbyist. It's a lot of L words, but I don't see necessarily immediate changes to that.
yeah.
We may see a reduction.
Yeah, I was going to
Yeah,
say,
go ahead. Go
they
ahead, Dieter.
like in the previous term, Trump targeted Section 1557, and there was a lot of chatter about rolling back language access notifications and other civil right protections. But so far, there hasn't been any of this chatter that I've heard about repealing the ACA. Instead, they're talking about how we're going to improve. I still yet to see. They have ideas of a plan apparently. So how do you see the
Well, I
administration
mean,
addressing this specifically with?
so so the ACA's got 70% approval among the public, so nobody's going to touch it, right? That's politically ill-advised. Um, the previous Trump administration took on the rules under Section 1557, which are the non-discrimination provisions
Yeah,
in the ACA. But they really were interested. They said, okay, we're going to revise this regulation earlier than would normally be done under something called the Administrative Procedures Act. Normally it's 5 or 10 years, depending on how the law is written. And, don't ask me for the exact citation. But they decided they were going to revise the 2015 or 2016 rule that was the first version of the rule on language access and other non-discrimination provisions, revise it a little early. And what they said is the reason they were doing that, they gave an economic reason. And the economic reason was that it costs $3 billion a year to provide notices of language assistance. And some of us react as like, are you kidding? Like, hello, if there were $3 billion a year for that specific function, of including in your, when you get from Kaiser or Care First or
Yeah.
United Health, your explanation of benefit, and then there's that, 1 or 2 pages of, si requiere, interprete, right? The notices that you can get an interpreter or translator or whatever. If that was actually $3 billion of economic activity, we would have known about that. Hello,
Yeah.
you know. But so it was essentially a spurious analysis. But the reason they did that is that it allowed them to go in and revise all of the other non-discrimination protections for LGBTQ plus,
Yeah.
for pregnant women, etc., for religious minorities. And they hung that on the reason they said, okay, we can revise this whole section of non-discrimination regulations. They hung it on this very spurious analysis, in my view, and not just mine, but other people who are far smarter than me, of the actual cost of providing notices of the availability of language assistance. Now, that revised rule was litigated immediately, and a federal judge in D.C. enjoined it and said, no, this is capricious and
Yeah.
arbitrary, that the Trump administration had revised this in a way that was not legal under the Administrative Procedures Act, which is the law that governs the creation of regulations in the government. But that judge said, okay, so all of that stuff for all of the other protected categories, we're going to enjoin, and it will revert back to the Obama era rule. But we're going to leave in place the changes for language access. And there were some notable changes. That there was no longer a provision that notices of language assistance had to be posted. There was no longer a provision that you had to have a language access coordinator, and some other things. Well, it took the Biden administration 2 years to then go back and revise that rule, which they did. And the draft rule was published in August of 22. A coalition of organizations, including ALC, but also the National Health Law Program, the National Immigration Law Center, Justice and Aging, the Asian American Pacific Health Forum, a whole bunch of organizations weighed in and provided extensive comments to say, hey, this is a great rule, but here's how you can make it better. It was finally published in May of last year, and the last bits go into effect later this month. And it's a really good rule. And they did something really smart. They split it away from the LGBTQ plus and other kind of more culture
Yeah.
war issues, and said, hey, here's the standalone rule, number one. And number two, you can go back. So that's like the really detailed
So
part.
they
Now we're going to
decoupled that
step
from
back a bit. We'll say,
the
okay,
policy, basically.
decoupled it from the
Yeah.
other protections, which the judge the federal judge had kind of already done, and that's fine. And the new rule has lots of really good stuff for our space in it, for patient advocates, for immigrant communities, for the language industry, including a requirement that any use of machine translation for anything that is, that affects health, rights, benefits, or that is complex or nuanced, any use of machine translation must be reviewed by a qualified human translator. There's a better definition of qualified translators and interpreters. It's not exactly all that we wanted, but it's at least a more stringent definition. There's a requirement that you have 15 FTEs at any particular site in a healthcare provider. Then you must have a non-discrimination coordinator. that healthcare providers must have language access policies and plans. There's a lot of really good stuff in there that I think will help ensure the provision of language access. The one thing they didn't address is AI and interpreting, because the rule was published in August of 22. The comments were closed 60 days
Yeah.
later in October, and ChatGPT 4 launched in March of
Right.
23.
Yeah.
So we're still waiting for the department to maybe give some guidance, even though there's a reading that you can read the rule, and it says that it gives the definition of machine translation that includes audio output. And so if you were being strict, you'd say, well, okay, AI interpreting is automated speech recognition or speech to
Right.
text, machine translation, natural language generation, or text to speech. At its core, it's machine translation. There may be AI interpreting solutions out there that would say, oh, no, that's not
Yeah.
how we
Yeah.
work. Right. So we're waiting to see if the department clarifies that. Maybe they'll clarify it, maybe they
So
won't. We've asked them to, we being the broader language
right,
access
right,
community.
right, and without that definition, well, and this is in part sort of what role Safe AI Task Force plays as well, right? So, we'll jump into that in a
Yeah.
moment. So just going back to, I mean, you know, we have a wait and see posture at the moment, right? And as you say,
Um,
no, go ahead. You know,
Well, you have to remember that in the previous version of the Trump administration, we still had offices of civil rights enforcing
yeah,
language access, whether it was in the Office of Civil Rights, the Department of Education, Department of Justice, Health and Human Services, et cetera, et cetera. Um, and the senior civil servants are all staying on, and the law is what it is. Um, and more importantly, so I don't want to necessarily say, okay, it's just there's not just that there's a quote unquote deep state, because that's BS. They're bureaucrats who have sworn to
yeah,
uphold the law. They're federal employees. I was a federal employee once. You swear an oath to uphold and defend the Constitution, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, fine. We have bipartisan support for language access in the Congress for education, for healthcare, and for other things. Bipartisan support, right? And it's easy to say, it's kind of lazy. I don't want to say easy, but oh, everybody in this space is on one side of the political spectrum or the other, or this is a particularly partisan issue. Actually, historically, it hasn't been, and recently it hasn't been. And we may see, in the next few weeks, we may see legislative action around language access in healthcare that is sponsored, led by Republican offices, to say, because if you're looking at Orange County, California, has a number of Republican representatives, or Texas with Republican senators and a lot of Republican representatives, that, massively multicultural, multilingual spaces, and a lot of the folks in those states and locations might actually vote Republican.
yeah.
So it's
Well,
it's it's kind of, there's a lazy analysis that says this is a Democratic issue, but actually no, it's pretty bipartisan.
well, and I think state governments and local governments can play a part in maintaining the level of access as well. Um, I, do you think that you'll see some of that shored up at at the state and regional
Oh yeah,
levels?
and we're seeing it now.
Yeah,
Yeah. um, Oregon's tried some things. The ALC doesn't necessarily agree with all of them, but it's
yeah,
it's doing, at least the legislature is paying attention and has allocated funds to support language access, which is a positive. The state of Colorado, and there have been ALC members involved in that,
yeah,
have, with a state level commission on language access. The state of Maryland, there are administrative offices of the courts that are improving language access across the U.S. So, it's, I said earlier, I could take my chair down to the edge of the sea and tell the tide not to turn, and immigrants will take, and that's, okay, immigrants, tides, whatever. But you have to remember that when you look at the census data, there are roughly between 65 and 70 million Americans who speak a language other than English at home.
that's right. yeah,
and about, about a third of them are LEP. They don't
yeah,
speak English well enough to interact with the healthcare system, with the local government, what have you. 70 million people is an enormous amount. That's bigger than the population of, the UK. It's bigger than the population of France. It's almost the population of Germany.
yeah,
And it's undercount, right? So
yeah.
the effective, efficient administration of public services, the profitable provision of healthcare depends on language access in no small measure.
As an educator as well, um, looking at a pivot to this uh, America First, away from multilingualism, um, more English-centric policies in classrooms and language education programs. Do you see this having an effect in this space, or is that also sort of a wait and see? Um, I had
I'm glad you asked.
conversations. There's a couple. I mean, the couple reasons I asked because I've been at a few events, conferences recently, and talking to educators in the space. Number one, they're all a little bit freaked out because enrollment in language courses is down. Also, folks uh, are choosing to pivot to other uh, programs. So there's a challenge there, and without interpreters, we are nothing really. Like they're such the most important ingredient in this business. So um, when I hear about cuts to programs for multilingualism, I get very concerned.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. So, um, the great thing about the American educational system is the great thing and the kind of crazy thing. It's maximally decentralized.
Yeah,
We have 56 or 57 states and territories. I should know the actual number. Each of them has a state educational agency. We have something like 11,000 local school districts, you know, and each of them sets its own policies within broad parameters, right?
yeah, yeah,
Um, so the Congress, the Department of Education, the president really doesn't have a huge amount of influence on education. Education is very much a local prerogative, a local decision. It's funded locally, the school board's elected locally, and so on. And outside of, maybe one or two states, there's a lot of support at the state level for in K-12 education for things like dual language immersion. Recognizing that roughly 10% of our student population speak another language when they come to school. 80% of those kids are citizens or legal residents, and they speak 300 languages. So there's dual language immersions popping up all over the place all the time. There's Hmong and Karen and Somali in Minnesota, and Ojibwe, and
yeah,
in Minnesota, Blackfeet and Spanish and Basque in Montana. Um, you know, and the real hope for the industry is actually those kids, especially the immigrant kids, who go through and become really functionally bilingual and biliterate, and decide maybe I'll try this translation or interpreting and localization, etc. thing out, and 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 there are programs in high schools around the country and in community colleges where they're using federal funding to support translation and interpreting training programs for that exact audience. There aren't enough of them, but they're growing. There were 3 or 4 10 years ago, and now they're 30 or 40. So that's a pretty good growth curve. You know, it's for when you look at colleges, then it's a challenge because you know, perception that a degree in the humanities or degree in languages isn't going to do you much good. You should get a
yeah,
degree in comp sci or business and go make money.
yeah,
And okay, but there are lots of programs. I would say that roughly, I'd say 20% of American colleges Community colleges and universities have really strong language programs, and ALC is engaging with that group. It's engaging with the ALC Bridge and reaching out to and providing guest lecturers, adjunct faculty, job postings
Right.
for kids in the programs, um, and the ATA, American Translators Association, Education and Pedagogy Committee, which is very closely, working very closely with ALC Bridge, is supporting and providing curricula. Like if you want to do a 12th grade, T&I program that prepares kids to take the CCHI exam, or prepares kids to take, when they turn 18, they can take the CCHI exam or the state consortial court interpreting exam, which is for 28 or however many states. And they can go out and make money, you
Yeah.
know. And for first generation kids, that's a big deal. And suddenly
Yeah.
they're not making a minimum wage, they're making, professional hourly rates and putting themselves through college and going on to found businesses and all that. And this has been going on for about, I don't know, 10, 12 years, uh, maybe a little longer, with, and there's lots of grassroots energy around it. Is the Department of Education at the national level going to pay attention? Maybe, maybe not. That's hard. Um, they got a lot of other issues to deal with. And at the state level, it's really a question of what are the how's that state organized and what are the issues in their own state education system. But I will say there's a lot of grassroots energy, especially in K-12 education, around language learning, not just for immigrant kids, but for Anglos as well.
Yep.
And we're we're tapping into that now. We're tapping into
Yeah.
that and making progress.
Well, one of the things that you know, this year I purpose to try to advocate for getting more technology in the hands of these kids as well, arming them with the tools that they're going to need to succeed. At this point in the language industry, you are an IT worker as well, right? And um, I think it's
We
going to be
have
really
been for a generation. We're
we
one of the
have.
most technologically advanced industries out there.
Yep.
I mean, you think about it, right? For translation and localization, you cannot be a professional translator now if you are not really adept with technology. In
That's right.
interpreting, we like we your company exists. BoostLingo started as a platform, a technology platform. We are we have been on the bleeding edge technology for 30 years as a language industry. People don't realize that because they think of interpreters and translators. Think of a translator, you think of Saint
Yeah.
Jerome
Yeah.
sitting at a scriptorium with the candles, writing with a quill pen. And that hasn't been the case, for a
Well,
very long time.
case in
Very long
point,
time.
case in point is generative AI exploded in the language space first, right? Which is why we were a little more in front of it than a lot of other industries,
Yeah.
which are playing catch up at this moment. Um, but before I leave it there, I move more into the safe AI stuff. In terms of what, and this goes back to my earlier point, like what strategies um, should we in the language industry employ to, I guess, stay vigilant, engage, and most importantly, resilient amid potential policy changes and you know, just keeping on top of it. What for our viewers and listeners, what advice, guidance would you give for folks in industry and adjacent industry to ensure that language access stays front and center?
So if you're in the language industry, you've got to be part of ALC and I think ALC and GALA. So ALC gets you
Yeah.
the US primarily,
Yeah.
GALA gets you the global. And ALC does. I am obviously biased, and I'm, to full disclosure, I'm a consultant for ALC. I'm also a lifetime honorary member, um, winner of the Bill Graper Award. He's probably looking down at me and snickering. ALC, it has as part of its mission representing the language industry
Yeah.
to the powers that be at the federal and state level. And it's so important to be part of that and
Yeah,
to support that with your membership, but also to come to the events to participate, and then to engage in the most important the reason to join an organization like ALC, or if you're an individual practitioner to join the ATA, is you're part of a community
yeah,
and you have people to talk to. You have a support network, a built-in support network. And you might think, oh, these are my competitors. Yeah, sometimes might be beating each other's brains out for one RFP and then partnering on another. That's
that's right.
okay.
Yeah,
It's totally that's okay. And um, but you have this you have this network of people you can talk to and learn from. And
absolutely.
I've gone to every ALC unconference from the very first one. I'll be at the next one in
Yep.
St. Pete Beach next month, February 18th, February 20th and 24th, 20th and
Good time to
21st,
be
I
in
think.
Florida. A
And
good month to be in Florida.
you know, and the learning there and the connections there are just so incredible.
Uh,
They've affected my business, helped me build my business and my connections, and I'm sure it's the same for a lot of other folks.
yeah, I want to chime in and agree. And especially the unconference, I find that folks are a little less on guard, a little more disarmed and willing to engage in some real conversations about where we're taking this. I agree. I think unconferences provide a more unfiltered engagement with folks, and so I wholeheartedly co-endorse attending those events. And
It
we've been ALC members since Boost started, and never look back. I love going to the events because we all get heads down in the stuff that we're doing, and it's an opportunity to just take a beat and reconnect with folks that are just as equally as passionate about this industry as we all are. I was gonna say, so I agree, and Gala as well has a nice, it's a nice way to reconnect with your compadres from Europe and other parts of the globe. And I guess I would endorse wherever you're located. There are other groups. If you're in uh, uh, Central South America, Vamos Juntos is a great event.
Juntos, Vamos
Yeah,
Juntos,
fantastic. I'm very excited about that event.
Aaliyah,
Aaliyah in
Aaliyah in
Europe.
Europe.
Yeah.
Yep.
Um, and and this is free plugs because I really do agree that community happens in these events. Um, you know, Intrinsically motivated to go every year to as many as I can, just to learn. Poke my head out of the gopher hole a little bit and see what else everybody's up to, and also understand some of the complex issues that we're all faced with each year. Um, And speaking of which, I wanted to get into a little bit about the Safe AI Task Force because that's a relatively new organization. And for our listeners who may not be familiar, can you maybe give us a sort of the high level of the what and why and
Sure,
who
sure.
about the Safe AI Task
So
Force?
Safe AI stands for Stakeholders Advocating for Fair and Ethical Use of AI in Interpreting, and it's a task force. We call it a task force because it's a very informal organization. It was formed um, in 2023 after Chat GPT 3 and 4 came out, and there's this massive hype, and the folks who went to Gala in Dublin that year and attended some other events, local world events in the spring of 23, came back saying, wow, there are all these technology vendors saying that AI is just going to replace interpreting. Not so much translation, because we've had machine translation for a generation,
Yeah,
and it's evolved from language weaver through NMT and now LLMs. But at every step, it's been kind of digested into the translation and localization workflow. And translators, the work of the day-to-day life of translators has certainly changed. And the LLMs have actually depressed rates to some degree. But overall, when you take a step back and take this historical view over a generation, we've absorbed the technology and digested it and incorporated it, and it
Yeah.
really, it's accelerated the demand for human translators, but it's also changed the work the translators do. It actually made it much more cognitively demanding. This is no longer the engine, right? The engine
Yeah.
is in here, in the on the web or in the computer, and now the translator has to do higher order cognitive tasks like, is this really congruent? Does this fit for purpose, and so on. And I'm providing that preface because it 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 seems to many of us that AI and interpreting will have an analogous pathway,
Mm.
that there will be applications of AI interpreting that are entirely standalone, probably low risk. Um, when we get to a point where the technology is stable and mature, which it is
Yeah.
not yet, um,
Yeah.
and there will be other applications where it's all humans, high risk, you know, high risk, high reward situations where, whether it's a diplomatic conference or it's a
Yeah.
surgery consult, where you need a human. Now,
Yeah.
the Safe AI came about. Um, there was a call for volunteers. We had 600 volunteers engaged in the Safe AI task force. I was um, chosen as the chair for good or bad. Um, the task force, safeaitf.org, safe AI, SAFETF. Somebody
We'll put
SA. Anyway, we'll
we'll run
put
that
it in the
across. Yeah, we'll run that across the screen as
This is
well.
why I couldn't do spelling. I always lost at spelling bees because I have to actually spell it out by hand. Um, but Safe AI Task Force has um, raised money to do a number of research studies. We did a perception survey
Yeah.
in 23 on the implementation of AI and in interpreting, that had 2,500 responses from interpreters, researchers, regulators, client side, healthcare systems, judicial systems, language service companies, technology companies, etc. Very broad base, and showed that we trust the computers for certain things and not for other things. And stepping again way back, it's a very high level, 80,000 foot view.
Yeah.
At the same time, a sort of grassroots deaf and hard of hearing group evolved and did their own research study, which involved 100 hours roughly of webinars and focus groups conducted in ASL, and produced similar results. Right then, there was guidance developed. We thought it would be guidelines. We created a guidelines committee, like as if we were going to draft some standards.
Mm.
But the guidelines committee said, no, we need to abstract it a level and say there are very important principles. And they came up with 4 principles. And this is the most important work that the Safe AI Task Force has done. There are 4 important principles. The first is there's end user autonomy. End user is not a great word for the people involved in a conversation, but that's what exists in the ISO and ASTM standards, so we're kind of stuck
Right.
with it. But the people involved in an interpreted encounter have the right they have the right to communicative autonomy. They have the right to the full ability to participate in that encounter. And that means that consequently, if they need to know, number 2, so the first principle is autonomy, number 2 is transparency.
Yeah.
Is this a human? Is this a human assisted by AI? Is this AI? And then 3, they have the ability to say, well, we want, I don't want AI, or I'm fine with AI. You have to have the ability to opt in, opt
Choice.
out,
Yeah.
um, choice. And then finally, it's accountability.
Yeah.
Accountability for harms and errors, transparency in the development of the process. So if something goes wrong,
Yeah. That.
right, if,
Yeah.
if the wrong kidney is operated on, who's responsible for that? right?
Yeah.
And
What
those
is
are
the current
pretty
thinking on
powerful.
that, by the way? Where are we at with that?
Um,
Because I think about
the
this all the time. I'm
I
like,
would
you can't, if the machine is doing it, then is it the the LLM that was created by company XYZ that's ultimately accountable? It's clearly you can't hold
right.
the
Well,
position.
that's
You know, uh,
so the the Biden administration had an ambitious AI
yeah,
regulation agenda, which has been OBE'd, right? Overtaken by events,
yeah,
namely the election. But um, I think that's going to play out in the marketplace,
yeah,
where sooner, at some point, there will be some, much as there was, with the case, I don't know, 30 years ago, intoxicado, right?
yeah,
Which meant poison, not drunk, right?
yeah,
But there will be, God help me for saying this, and you know, may God forgive me for saying this.
yeah.
Somebody's going to get harmed, and
Yeah,
then who's held accountable?
there's going to be a
And a
spectacular
smart lawyer,
failure. Yeah,
right? A smart lawyer will say, "Well, I'm suing Microsoft because they developed the LLM, and I'm suing the doctor, and I'm suing the healthcare provider, and I'm suing the app developer,
and
right?"
see what sticks. Yeah,
Um, and see what's six. The federal government has taken a position that liability is shared for AI used in diagnostics, in what's called patient decision making, that the liability is shared. That neither side can pawn it off on the other, right? The AI developer of whatever algorithm that's being used in patient decision making or healthcare does not get to say, well, you tick the box on accepting the terms and conditions, so we're not responsible. And the healthcare provider, oh, we just bought it, and they told us it would work. They don't get to say that either. Like, both sides are responsible. We haven't seen that play out yet.
yeah,
And it's going to be interesting, like how the Joint Commission on Healthcare Accreditation deals with this. How the next administration is probably not going to take it on. They've signaled pretty strongly they're not interested in regulating AI very much. So we're going to see it, unfortunately, play out in real life. But to step back to Safe AI, because that's not Bill Rivers speaking as the chair of Safe AI. That's Bill Rivers speaking as Bill Rivers.
mm,
To step back to Safe AI, we have this guidance in place, and Boost has developed a rubric, a guide to how to implement this.
yeah,
Um, the the National Council on Healthcare Interpreting has developed their guide on how to implement AI in interpreting. And there are other organizations and other companies who are taking that guidance that I talked about, these very high level principles, saying, okay, how does this apply to our use cases,
yeah,
and providing much more detailed guidance. And I think that's the power of this Safe AI. Again, 600 volunteers, 2,500 responses, 2 years of work,
yeah,
tremendous support from the language industry, from the professional associations, unprecedented collaboration with the deaf and hard of hearing community.
yeah,
But we came to this point where we have these guidance principles that should form the basis of how we as an industry, as a profession, as professions, um, address AI and interpreting, because we're not going to stop it. We
yeah.
can't
And
stop
I should point out that all
it. And
this stuff is available for folks to grab off the Safe AI Task Force website.
oh yeah, it's all on.
It's all
It's
there.
a it's a it, yeah, we it's a very straightforward site.
Yep.
Everything is on the splash page. You can get to everything, and it's again, it's this the point being that we're facing this in a way that kind of didn't nobody really took on, when remote interpreting hit. That's 20 years ago, right?
Yeah.
Like, OPI had been there since the late 80s, or when early 80s with language line. But when video remote interpreting came along, it happened very rapidly, and
It did.
the nobody was organized to think about it and develop thoughtful ways to talk about it, to regulate it, to standardize it.
Yeah. And
So it evolved, right?
you know, when we started, we felt a lot of the pushback and concern. You know, that was back in 2015, and there was still quite a resistance to the tech, and you know,
Yeah,
it's gonna kill jobs, blah blah blah. It did the exact opposite, right? It actually expanded
yeah,
opportunities for interpreters, and you know, like with any technology, right? You know, some things, some tasks go away, some things change ultimately, but at the end of the day, the technology typically takes us forward and creates new opportunities and new
right.
ways for us to connect. So, um, in terms of
Yeah,
the,
and safe AI. I don't, but I want to say the last thing that as with as in comparison to VRI, the idea behind safe AI is that at least we're collectively as a community around the table thinking about this and finding ways to make it useful. And that should accelerate the development curve compared to VRI, where now VRI is absolutely essential. You cannot provide language access
yeah,
in remote areas or in languages of lesser diffusion or at 2 in the morning on New Year's Eve without it. Right?
yeah,
It's absolutely essential to the provision of language access in healthcare and in the judicial system and other public services. But there, but it took a while to evolve, and we're essentially trying to short circuit that and accelerate that process so that the evolution doesn't take as long.
yeah.
At least that's my opinion. Not speaking on behalf of Safe AI, but on behalf of Bill Rivers.
Well, we're coming close to time here, but I wanted to maybe just ask one last question about Safe AI Task Force. What, in your estimation, what does the task force plan to? How are you guys planning to measure ultimately the success of its initiatives, and what are some of the you know, the benchmarks and outcomes that would, in your estimation, would indicate a, you know, progress towards ethical AI in interpreting?
So, in no particular order,
Yeah,
the we are working with standards bodies, ISO,
yep,
and the International Standardization Organization, Technical Committee 37 on language and terminology, Subcommittee 5 on translation, interpreting, and related technologies, as well as ASTM Committee F43,
yep,
which is the main committee on language services and products. And not to get too wonky here, but there are actually very comprehensive and strict legal definitions of what constitutes an industrial standard and how they're developed. And we're working with both of those bodies to address AI in interpreting. Um, there are already with translation, there are requirements for labeling translation under F25 ASTM F2575, the standard practice for language translation. So, is a translation entirely human? Is it some blend? Is it entirely MT? Right? And colleagues like Alan Melby and Arl Lamel and other
yep,
international colleagues have worked very hard. And so we're looking at similar types of labels for interpreting, and so that'll be you know worked out in probably the next year to 18 months. That's one piece. The second piece are these four ethical principles being a, adapted into more detailed guidelines. As I said, we've already seen um, one company and one nonprofit or membership organization do it, and there are multiple other companies and membership organizations working on that to address how the company might be implementing AI, or to address how the members of an organization, a professional organization, might think about using AI. That's the second piece. And the third metric is, do we see regulation, which, I've kind of hinted at. I don't expect any in the upcoming administration. Um, but again, to step way back, it's more important that we're at the table and engaging with the key stakeholders as this technology evolves.
yeah. And to that point, we still have a long way to go. And I guess my question is, um, are there other key partnerships, other key organizations that need to be brought into the fold um, to get us there to where we need to be? Like where do we
I
need
think
to continue to advocate and educate?
the the biggest gap is, I say the most important gap is on the client side,
Yeah.
right? And I'm less concerned about major healthcare providers, the big time networks in the U.S. or federal courts. I'm more concerned about, you know, state and local courts or mid-sized regional healthcare organizations or local health care organizations who will experiment with AI and might do so without fully understanding the potential consequences. And as I said earlier, that's kind of a near term worry, but not a long term worry, because what we're already seeing, at least anecdotally, with companies like Boost and other companies. I'm not saying that Boost has said this to me. I'm just saying, companies like Boost
Hmm.
that that client side that have experimented with AI and interpreting are coming back saying it's not up to
Yeah.
snuff, you
Yeah.
know. And
The the date went okay, but we're coming back to the things that were
yeah,
are tried, tested, and
you know,
true. And it's
and
like with anything, right? Like it's we're already seeing some of the limitations, and we're seeing where the you know where it is effective and where it's applicable, and you got to just keep testing and trying. But I think that it all begins with a dialogue, between the tech providers, the language service providers, and advocacy groups like Safe AIT Task Force. That's we have to keep all those channels open, right?
yeah, and I don't want to come across as anti-technology. There are um, applications of large language models of AI that are being developed and actually deployed that really enhance the ability of the interpreter. For example, when I first started as an interpreter in the fall of 1988, which is a long time ago. I'm not going to do the math. Y'all can do it yourselves. Um, my first assignment was at a scientific conference to develop an X-ray spectroscopy satellite between NASA and the Soviet Space Institute. And I had about a month before this assignment. I took that most of that month developing my terminology database, going around to sitting in the Library of Congress with rare dictionaries like the Russian English dictionary of astrodynamic terminology or whatever, and literally writing out by hand a terminology list and compiling that into a loose leaf binder, right? I mean, you think about that, but that's what we did way back when, right? I'd probably ask. There are apps that could do that for me now in, you know, a very short period of time while I'm making a cup of tea. And there are things like that. And Catherine Allen at Boost has been really good about like, compiling the list and explaining those technologies where AI can really enhance the work of the interpreters in ways that are similar to how computational technologies have enhanced the productivity of translators and localizers.
Yeah.
And I think that's going to be everybody's benefit. That's going to be great, you know.
Yeah, and we're increasingly we see the term the augmented interpreter, right? And I really, really well
Yeah,
and truly firmly believe in that. It's part of the toolkit. There are some amazing tools
yeah,
already available, for folks. And the importance of the language professional in uh, you know, business and in the public sector is just going to increase with competency and capabilities using
Yeah,
these tools. So,
agreed.
um,
Agreed.
yeah. Well, listen, we've come up to the end of the hour. I really want to thank you for jumping on. I look forward to future chats, and reconnecting at future events as well. This is going to be 2025. Any predictions, man? Anything that you want to throw out there
I am
for?
not gonna. I am no, no. All
Not even going to go
predictions are
there.
wrong. So, we're gonna see continued enforcement of language access. See, um, we're gonna see an increased use of AI to augment interpreters,
Yeah,
and I think we'll see an increased demand for humans in the not just in the loop but in control, in interpreting. Very much analogous to how technology has affected translation over the last generation.
yeah,
I've been bullish on this industry for 30 years. It's a fantastic industry. Um, but what Yosechi said in 2002, what Bill Wood said in 2010,
yeah.
interpreters or translators who will not be replaced by technology. They'll be replaced by translators or interpreters who learn how to use technology. And I think that's absolutely true.
There's just so much cool tech that's coming coming out, and I agree with your sentiment that you know it is designed by people who care about other human beings, and you know we we truly believe in language access as a right and as a uh, um, important. I don't know what the best word for it is, but it's an important component to the human experience, and it lifts everybody up when they have access, communicative autonomy, as you said earlier today. It's so important.
We work for the greater good, whether we're in
Absolutely.
translation, interpreting, localization. We make we open markets up. We make public services, healthcare, just the justice system accessible. Um, it is it has been an honor and a pleasure for the last 15 years to advocate for this industry, because I can walk into any office in DC and say, this is how we make people's lives better. This is how we make people's lives better. We make companies more money.
Yeah.
We provide meaningful, middle class professional living for more than 200,000 people in the U.S. It's just a fantastic industry to be part of, and it has been the honor of my career to be part of it.
Well, Bill, we thank you for all the good work that you do, and thank you so much for joining us here today to share a little bit of insight into where things may be headed. And we'll look forward to reconnecting at some point later in 2025.
All right.
Thanks, Bill.